Rose's demeanor towards all of this. I had mentioned earlier, and I wonder what you think about it, Keith, that had Rose taken the approach towards gambling and made himself the face of the scourge of gambling, similar to what Mantle did about alcohol and how it can tear away at your career and your family, and it's not for everyone, and don't do it. Had Rose taken that approach, do you think he would still be banned today on that front?
I'm really conflicted about the answer to that, because you could just as easily ask the theoretical, if Pete had laid low for a long time and then came out as the face of baseball-friendly gambling, which the leagues have now endorsed, maybe he would have been reinstored that way. You know, the attitude towards this entire topic has done a 180 in the last 20 years, maybe longer, really. It started with the acceptance of fantasy baseball as kind of a low-grade gambling form, which I often indulged in, as you may remember.
Yes, I do.
But, you know, it's such a strange what's moral and what's immoral. It changes every few years in many different areas. I think Pete went through periods of time in which he was really remorseful and was showing an understanding of what happened and was trying to atone. And I thought he should have been left off the hook. And then, oh, by the way, the stuff with underage girls came out, and that was the end of it. But they did, you know, the commissioner's office had to sign off on Pete Rose going back to Fox for baseball postseason coverage. So he did, in fact, get back into the game, and there was a path for him to go further back into the game and maybe even have that ineligibility lifted in some formal way. It had been, to my mind, it had been lifted informally. Pete Rose was not, I mean, you can't be banned from baseball and you know, be on the frickin' postgame show for the World Series. So that's you know, it's like the Joe Jackson ban. We're going to celebrate Shoeless Joe Jackson every year now in Dyersville, Iowa, but he's still officially banned, and nobody should do what he did. Brought to you by DraftKings. It's kind of a mixed message now.
Keith Olbermann here on the Rich Eisen Show. What about the sense of the fact that Cooperstown is a museum as much as it is a shrine to the greats, and placing on a plaque the whole story as best you can fit on a plaque, and put Pete in for what he did on the field? What about the sense of that?
Well, Keith? You're now asking to do something subtle in one of the least subtle places in the world, which is the Baseball Hall of Fame. I mean, if you wanted to do that, there are means to do it tomorrow. Stratify the Hall of Fame into echelons. You know, the all-time immortals, or whatever you want to call them, which would be Ruth and Aaron and Josh Gibson and the 20 people or whatever. And then there'd be everybody else who reached certain statistical plateaus, and other people who got voted in, and infamous people who, you know, ruined their own lives and careers. And you could have essentially the Hall of Fame members who were bad guys. If you want to have Barry Bonds and Pete Rose over in one section with Shoeless Joe Jackson and Eddie Seacott and George Hall and Jim Devlin from the 1877 Louisville team that threw the pennant that year, you could do that too. But this is, you know, this requires a lot. I will point out, as is often, I think, mentioned about Pete, the best part of the Baseball Hall of Fame is the behind-the-scenes tour that you can usually get if you know somebody. Mm-hmm. And in a room downstairs next to the 37-degree photo vault is the uniform vault. And I forget how many Pete Rose uniforms are in the Hall of Fame right now, but I believe it was a dozen. And that, by the way, the uniforms is how we knew something was wrong, because when you could not collect baseball uniforms because teams did not sell them or distribute them in the late 70s and early 80s, you could always find a game-used Pete Rose uniform. And the story was he needed so much money for something, gambling was the rumor, that he used to buy the uniforms after he wore them in a game or two and would sell 20 or 30 uniforms a year. And the joke was, collector goes to the dealer and says, I want a Pete Rose game-used uniform. And the guy goes, Cincinnati, Montreal, or Philadelphia? And the fan goes, Cincinnati. He goes, home or away? Like, home. 60s vest style or Big Red Machine pullover? Pullover, please. Okay, what size? And that's 1979, 1980. So we sort of saw this coming. So that circles back to the idea that Pete Rose is in the Hall of Fame, as Shoeless Joe Jackson is in baseball's marketing strategy. It's such a complicated subject, which would be made a lot easier if they just said, "Hey, this is a complicated subject. The rules bend now and again. We're going with this one this year, and we'll see what happens next year."
Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.